All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the QT2 Systems Podcast Series, the QT2 Roundtable. In this series, we try to look at different topics that endurance athletes have questions about and then bring the answers to you from a bunch of different perspectives. And so today we are talking about ultra running, and I'm really pleased to have with us three guests today. We have Coach Amy Rusiecki, who's a coach with QT2 Run, also a race director for ultra races and an amazing ultra runner herself. And then we have two of the athletes she works with. We have Vicki Hart and we have Emily Wivell. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today.
For having us.
Yeah,
I'm
happy to be here.
Yeah, well, I am so excited for you guys to start telling some of your power stories. I know we talked a little before we got started, but I saved a lot of the good stuff so we can just see it come out live. So, Vicki, I want to start with you and just see if you can just kind of just generally talk through your story about how you came to running and then how you transitioned, how and when you transitioned over to the ultra scene.
Yeah, so I didn't start running until later in life. So I ran my first marathon when I was 30, and it was with Team in Training. So I got a flyer in the mail and just it was a point in my life when I was interested in doing something new, and went to the meeting and ended up running the San Diego Marathon that year. It was 2007. And I ran marathons sort of one or two a year for the next few years. And then started running trail marathons and just really fell in love with trail running, and ran a couple of ultras, but not in a super disciplined way. I was sort of following friends who were doing similar races and running with them, or just trying to run long runs, but not really not really in a very focused way. I took a little bit of time off running and did a lot of hiking for a while, and then during the pandemic started running, sort of upping my mileage again, and feeling like I kind of want to see what I can do with running and with ultra running. And that's when I started thinking about coaching, and I kind of knew Emily, who's here with us today as well, through my partner who works with her, and I got in touch with Amy, and I've been working with Amy for the last year and a half. And really getting more into focused training and upping my ultra game.
All right, thank you. Now, one thing you mentioned before we went live was that you hiked the Appalachian Trail, right?
I did, yeah, back in 2017.
Yeah, so did you do that all in one, or
We did. Yep, Georgia to Maine. Yeah, it was almost 6 months of just living in the woods and taking it day by day. And I always tell people it was the most challenging thing I'll never do again.
Okay. So what made you decide to do that?
It was, so my partner, Chris, and it was something that he and I had both thought of when we were younger. I think he was in college and he was considering it, and I learned about it in high school and was really intrigued. And then life happened, and neither of us ever did that. And then we started dating about a year and a half before we hiked the trail, and we were on a trail run one day and we were talking about it. We're like, oh yeah, I thought about doing that. I thought about doing that too. And we realized if we were going to do it, that was the year. We were both at career transitions. We could take 6 months, and yeah, we basically just packed up our places. We had nowhere to go back to. That was part of the plan. So we rented a car, drove down to Georgia, and walked back.
Wow. So when you got out of the car or when you got back to Maine after 6 months, were you like, okay, now what do we do? Or do you figure that out along the way?
Yeah, his family has a camp by a lake, so we had a nice sort of retransition into back into civilization, which was good. And that's when I started running again after hiking for so long and realizing that very different muscles. And so it kind of felt like I was starting from scratch as a runner again.
Wow, that's so interesting. So then you said that you heard about, so you got in touch with Amy, and that was partially through knowing Emily, is that?
That's right. Yeah. So my partner Chris works with Emily, and happened to hear about some of her amazing exploits that I'm sure you guys will talk about in a little bit. and was like, oh, you've got to meet this woman, Emily. She's doing amazing, crazy stuff. It's right up your alley. You've got to hear about this. And so he connected us. And then when I was thinking about coaching, you know, I just reached out to Emily and said, hey, what's your experience been? Who are you working with? And she only had amazing things to say about the experience. So that's how I got in touch with Amy.
Yay, Amy!
Yay!
No, it's funny that like I never knew that that's how Vicky got my name. Every once in a while, I get connected with an athlete who like comes into QT2 and is just like, I want to work with Amy, and I'm always like, how did you know who I was? So this was an interesting connection that I never knew about, but really ironic.
Yeah. I love that. All right. So Emily, I'm going to ask you a similar question. How did you get into running, and talk about your transition over into the ultra world?
Yeah, so I ran in high school track, and then I didn't run for years. And then one day I decided, hey, I'm gonna like start running again for fun. And I did, like Vicky started marathons. I kind of got bored of it. I was like, oh, okay, I can go 26 miles now. What's next? So I then signed up for, I had no clue what I was doing, signed up for an ultra trail race, didn't train for it, nothing, just went and did it and thought I was going to die. And the rest kind of is history. I guess I got a little bit of addicted there, but that's when I got to the point where for, I don't know, 5 years, I just winged everything I did. And I was like, if I had somebody who knew what they were doing to help me, what could I really do? So that's kind of how I came to Amy, and yeah, that was 2020, right before the pandemic. Then everything was canceled. So yeah.
So when you say you winged a bunch of stuff, tell me about the biggest race that you just kind of winged for you.
The
I did
Vermont
too.
100 twice.
Oh, okay.
The first time I did it, I DNF'd because I mentally quit before, my body was done. But then I came back the next year, still really didn't know what I was doing, but did it. So that was probably, the biggest one. And that's when I realized, I was like, I can do this. What could I really do if I knew what I was doing? So
What was the year that you finished? Was that 2019? Like the hot year?
I did finish 19, but the first year I finished was 17 or 18.
Okay.
I can't remember.
Okay.
It might have been 18.
I'm more just marveling at the like these two amazing women who both like are downplaying what Vicky's like, oh, I just hiked for a little bit. No, she hiked the Appalachian Trail. That's not just hiking a little bit, right? And then Emily, who's like, yeah, I thought maybe I would just like kind of wing it, like wing 100-milers. That's totally normal and totally anything that anybody can do. Yeah.
Or not.
Yeah, I know, exactly. It's amazing.
So Emily, did you find Amy through the Vermont 100, or did you know, like, how did you guys come together?
It was 2020. It would have been the 2020 race. I didn't get in, right? I was on like last on the wait list, or second to last, and I was like devastated. And that's when they had, hey, if you work with a coach, you'll get an entry. And I like jumped all over it. And looking back, I'm like, that's probably the best thing that happened. Or else I'd still be winging it, honestly. So yeah.
So all right, so tell me what do you think the difference was? So you said, now looking back at it, it was the best thing that happened. So what did you do differently with Amy than you did when you were figuring it out on your own?
Have somebody to hold me accountable a little bit, because I would come up with every excuse in the book why I didn't feel like running that day. But I didn't really know. I would just go run, right? Like there was no what should I be running for a long run, right? I didn't know. You can Google plans, but does it work? So I think that's the difference. And yeah.
Emily, I think there's also an element of like, most of my athletes, like when they have a big race, and this is just part of Emily's personality too, but a lot of times when someone has like a race coming up, they want to just talk a little bit about, okay, let's just kind of talk through, here's what my fueling plan should be. Here's, maybe the gear I should be wearing, what do we think an appropriate finish time is? Like they just kind of want to talk through the logistics and talk through it. And like Emily's the person where I have to call her and be like, your race is coming up. Do we want to set aside time? Are you sure we don't want to set aside longer to talk about these things? Because again, she's in that I can just wing it mentality. And at times it's really trying to get her to be like, I guarantee it'll be better if we just kind of have just a little bit of a conversation about it.
Totally true. Yes.
Yeah. So it also helps you be a little more kind of organized or a little more thoughtful of your approach, which I hope brings a little more confidence when things do inevitably go sideways on race day, because they always do.
Always do.
To at least be like, yeah, we talked about that a little bit. Yeah, I know what to do when that happens. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, and I have some more questions for you, Emily, but I want to go back to Vicki for a little. So, you said that you did a 50 miler last year, right?
That's right.
Okay, so which event was that?
It was a free to run 50 miler by the Berks running group in Western Massachusetts.
Okay, so what kind of what made you decide on that event?
Couple of things. One, it's really small. I don't like the big events. So it's a really, especially that there's a bunch of different distances, but for the 50 miler, I think there were 12 of us that started. So it was really, really tiny, which I loved. That was wonderful. But the biggest thing was I'm not a speedy runner, and I've never been speedy, and I'm working on it, but I'm racing the cutoffs all the time. And it has a 15-hour cutoff. So I'd originally looked at like Vermont 50 and some of the others, but they have like 12 and 13-hour cutoffs. And I just wasn't confident that, where I was last year, it was my first full year with Amy. I just wasn't confident that I would be able to run those races and not be able to meet a cutoff, or B, just not be running scared and paranoid the whole time and making it miserable on myself. So even 15 hours, I was like, Amy talks about having those conversations before the race, and I think our conversation was all me panicking about not making like the 2 end loop cutoffs. Turned out it was fine. Spoiler alert, everything went well. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that I had a race that was really generous and would allow me to to not be as paranoid as I might have been otherwise.
So
I think the way that we talked about it, Vicki, too, was it was allowing you to run your own race, because you weren't running the race based on beating the cutoffs, but instead you were running a race based on, this is how I feel, I'm listening to my body, I'm running at a pace that's appropriate for me. And that was important, was just, you finding a place where you could allow the fitness to shine and not just, feeling that pressure means you're not running your race and you're running with that little bit of tension and all of that. So it was really just like finding a race that allowed you to showcase all the hard work you put in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it did make a huge difference during the race. So it was, there was basically 6 loops, and, you come back to the start finish, and my boyfriend was there, and he was keeping tabs on the time for me. And there were times when I was like, oh, this is, especially in the last 2 loops, like, I don't know if I can do it. And he had the times he's like, can you run a 24-minute mile? And I was like, yeah, I can do that. He's like, get out there, because you can totally do this. So it really, like, having that luxury mentally was really good for me.
Yeah, so a race that small though, I mean, when you think like a lot of people who run marathons, there's this appeal of these huge, big city, 50,000 person marathons. And if you don't have an aid station every mile, it's like, oh my God, the world's like coming to an end. Now, what you just did is completely different. So can you talk a little bit about how you were able to like get your fueling and the support that you needed throughout the race? How did you do that?
It was so the race was, it was a figure 8. So you did, which you did 3 times. So it was a 9-mile loop and a 6-mile loop ish. And then you kind of come back to the aid station in between each of those. And so I knew that and was planning for it. Fueling is not my strong point, as Amy will tell you. We've been working on that. So, you know, so I had my bottles, and there was an aid station on the 9-mile loop that that had stuff there. So I just kind of knew what, like, if I was at my slowest, where I would be, and made sure that I had enough fuel in between those. And yeah, and then just kind of headed out. And I found, like, in training, I could eat pretty much anything. I'm, knock on wood, have a pretty strong stomach. But when I was out there in the race, and I've experienced it since, I just can't do solid foods after about mile 20. And so really had to adjust to gels and mushy bananas. And like, that was what I was going on between the aid stations.
Yeah.
Vicky, Emily and I are laughing at this because, like, one of the struggles that I've had with Emily, like, her big race last year was a 200-mile race. And I know Reem's going to get there eventually, but like, Emily hates dry food. That's always what she said. I hate dry food. And I'm like, well, you can't run 200 miles just like drinking Gatorade. And so, like, we're going to have to work through this. So I'm just laughing that I can't believe there's more than just Emily that won't eat dry foods.
It's not just me. No, no dry food. It's got it. I ran 100 miles on watermelon one time. I don't recommend it, but I'm glad there's other people like me out there. Thanks, Vicky.
I can chew. I can chew. I just can't swallow. Like, for some reason, at that point, it just sort of like sits there in my mouth, and I just can't swallow. So yeah, I get that. And I found, my stomach took as long to recover from this race as my legs did. It wasn't pretty.
Reem, this is what I'm dealing with.
I know, but Amy, when we talk, I mean, we've talked a few times, and you're like, ultra's all about eating. And so I'm thinking, like, there's a lot.
To be clear, in her 200-mile race, I'm pretty sure Emily did actually eat dry foods. So she was ultimately able to overcome that. But I feel like I gave her as much emotional support on that aspect than any other aspect of the race, was just being able to eat dry food.
In my defense, I didn't eat it while I was running. It was only at aid stations while I was like sitting and, but there I ate more cheeseburgers, quesadillas, and pancakes than I care to eat again. But yeah, I did. I had to eat the dry food. Let's not talk about in between aid stations. We won't talk about what I ate then.
So, all right. Just a couple more questions for you, Vicky. As you were training for this race, for the longest event that you'd ever, the Appalachian Trail is the longest event you'll probably ever do, but from this longest run going into 50 miles, what are some challenges that you felt like that you had to overcome along the way to get yourself to the starting line?
So we talked about this a little bit before we got on today. So the race was in September of last year, and in February of last year, I had a hysterectomy. So I'd started working with Amy. She knew about it from the very beginning. And so we planned to build up so that I was at a decent fitness level when I had the surgery. And then coming back from that, it was at least 6 weeks without running, and then starting to rebuild from the surgery. And I was really fortunate. Everything went really well with the surgery, and I recovered really fast. So I was back. I think I did a 20-miler in May, which I was super proud about. But there was that dip, in training, and, in Training Peaks, you can see the graph and you can see your fitness go down, and I'm very like numbers oriented. And so that was like panicky for me. And then watching it like come back up again as we started training, in April, May, June. So that was kind of mentally and physically a challenge. And then the other thing that hits me is like I have traveled quite a lot for work, and at times, points in the season, work can be kind of demanding. And so just this like working the training around a real life work job scenario, like that can be a challenge at times. a couple of weeks ago, I was in Oregon and had a proposal due, and there were some red days on the calendar just because life happened. And so kind of working around that kind of stuff and coming back from it and figuring out what to do to either make up or just let go of those training sessions.
So do you feel like it helps you though to have that event on the calendar that you know that you're targeting to keep you honest, even though knowing, I mean, like life gets in the way sometimes, you know, like
Yeah.
we can't always hit those green boxes on Training Peaks, but just knowing that you had something that you were, you know, a big goal on your schedule.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I thought about it a lot. I still, I think about it a lot this year too, like thinking about goals and what to train for. And I don't really like events. I like training. So it's sort of a necessary evil, but it is a very necessary evil to have something on the calendar that I know, like, okay, this is the target and this is what you're going to have to perform.
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah,
like it's so funny. It's like, it's so many people's story though, that like, most of us are not going to like make a living running and all of that. Like all of us are juggling. How do we fit in the training with life and, being a parent, being a spouse, having other activities outside of running, work, like all of these other things, and how do you fit it in? And I find often like the people that really kind of are respecting all of that balance, like a lot of times that's when you come to coaching, of just being like, okay, how can I maximize the time that I have, knowing that I'm balancing all these other things? So here's what I can give, and how do I make that happen? So I feel like we all do that, and at times it's just like, yeah, work is more important today. I'm sorry, I can't run. Like that happens to all of us. And that's just life.
Yeah, it's definitely like, but it helps like as a coach, I'm like, as much as you can tell me when work is going to get in the way, let me know, because it's like we can get pretty creative with getting in what you need to. So.
And I think that's definitely something, and Emily talked to this before a little bit too, that the accountability, like work does get busy and I'm like, oh, but Amy's watching. And so like there's definitely that motivation, knowing that somebody is kind of keeping track as well. It helps to balance that when it's easy to say, oh, I could just work another hour on this instead of going for a run.
Right. Yeah, and there's definitely a difference between training and exercising, and training always has something looming out there, something that you're working towards, and exercise like, okay, well, I guess I'll just do that tomorrow instead, sometimes. So, all right, Emily. So we talked about a year and a half ago about some of your running, but I do want you to come back and talk, because Amy just mentioned it, 200-mile run. So you did last year, right?
Last October. Yep.
October. So
the Moab 240.
Moab 240. All right. So
not even a 200-miler, 240 miles, just because she's an overachiever.
And then it was technically 247.8 because bonus miles.
Why not?
So
yeah, I went for a little run.
Yeah, I think that we might have posted the picture of your Garmin on that 247.8. That's something. All right. So what brings someone to sign up for a 240-mile running event?
That is a good question.
It's,
I did hundreds for several years, and I have this drive in me, like I need to know how far I can go. And I was like, I know I can go 100 miles. Like, what's next? And, cruising ultra sign up. After I did Grand to Grand in 2022, I don't know, there's something, I have a love-hate relationship with the dry, dusty desert. And, Moab caught my eye, and it's one of those things I kept coming back to, right? And it's a lottery. And I'm like, well, throw my name in the hat. And sure enough, my name was drawn, and that's when your heart sinks a little bit. It's like, oh shoot, now it's real. But yeah, I just wanted the challenge. How could I go that far? So
how long did it take you to finish the 247.8? miles?
105 hours and 9 minutes. So
Okay.
4 days and 9 hours.
Okay.
I
So
had a lot of fun tracking her during those 4 days. I remember like running with buddies of mine right after she started and just being, like telling my friends, like, she just embarked on this journey and like, let's see. And then throughout the days, like at some point, all of my friends were invested because they had heard me talk about it for several days of running. Like, how's your athlete doing? How's Emily doing? And so it was fascinating because you could literally look at a map and see where she was at any given time. And it was amazing.
So going into it, so in those 4 days and 9 hours, how much time were you moving versus did you take like sleep breaks or, I mean, did you take naps along the way at all?
I slept for about 6.5 hours over the course of that time. Some of it, I didn't have pacers, but I had a crew, so slept in the back of the car. A lot of it was dirt naps. There, there was one night where it was literally 14 miles in a straight line with one left turn. And I was zigzagging from one ditch to the other. Like I couldn't keep my eyes open. So that night I just would keep taking a nap in the ditch. But I think, yeah, that was the hardest part. I'm one of those people that like I'm sleeping on the couch by 9 and I need like a solid 8 hours. So to go that like the sleep deprivation is what killed me. And there's no way to train for that.
Yeah.
So
So when you went into it, did you have a plan, like in terms of like a sleep schedule? Did you think about, was that part of your pre-race consideration?
no, because other people I talked to were basically like, you're gonna sleep when you're tired. So I didn't have any, in typical Emily fashion, I winged it and I didn't have a plan and I slept when I was tired. And I really didn't know how long to sleep, right? I think the most is about halfway. I laid down for about 3 hours. And that was the most.
Did you have someone wake you up? Because I would think after working out for 2 days, I would like, you could have been sleeping on the dirt for a day,
So if I was out sleeping on my own, eventually you would wake up because you're cold, but I would set an alarm. But I'm also one of those people, I hate the sound of an alarm, so I would always wake myself up before it went off. So yeah, took about 5-minute naps.
All right. So
Emily deciding to do this 200-mile race, it was really interesting. And I was really open with Emily before she was like, I'm going to do this thing because I have coached athletes to run 100-mile races and I've run 100-mile races myself. But I was very clear with Emily when she's like, I'm going to do this thing. I'm like, just to be clear, I've never trained an athlete for 200 miles. I've never run 200 miles. This may be a little bit of, we're both going to do some research and maybe we're going to learn some things along the way. So it was really interesting to learn some things and, kind of experiment, but also kind of expand my knowledge base in this process. But, even when it came to sleep, like I asked anybody that I knew and they all just kind of were like, don't go in with the plan because then you'll sleep when you're not tired. Like the best thing you can do is just sleep when you're tired and then move anytime that you're not tired. And so like some of that was the best advice we could get. And that's, it was interesting to have that approach where it's like, I kind of know what I'm doing, but there's aspects of this that I don't know, and we're going to learn together.
Well, we figured it out, so.
Well, Emily just winged it, and I had to do a little bit of winging it, but it worked out all right.
So over the course of this race, like, was it looped at all, or was it a point to point, or what was
It
it like?
was one gigantic loop. It started and finished in the same spot, but there was no repetition.
And how was the course marked at all?
They say it was, but marking 240 miles is, no, there were markers out there. At night it was hard because I don't know what kind of reflective tape they use, but it wasn't very reflective at all. So
it wasn't reflective to light. Oh.
Yeah. So, but you had to have, one of the mandatory things was you had to have the course, the GPS file. So I had it on my phone and my watch.
Okay.
And good thing I did, because I'd probably still be wandering somewhere in Moab.
I mean, I remember last year when we were talked about the Grand to Grand, that race, you weren't allowed to use any of that, right? I
Right.
thought that you said, right? So you were out there, because I was thinking, how does anyone know where you are? Because you didn't have all that.
Yeah, that was
Sometimes-
a little better, but yeah, here you wore, like Amy was saying, a tracker, so they knew where you were, if you were to get lost.
Did you see people along the way?
I went many sections where I was all alone, especially towards the end. And unlike 100-milers where you kind of see the same group of people on and off throughout the whole race, 200s I've learned was different. Is every time you went into an aid station, people had different schedules. Somebody would go to sleep, other people wouldn't, and you stop a lot longer than a traditional race, right? So almost every time you left, you were with new people or no one at all. The end got very lonely. You have a lot of soul searching and quality time with yourself.
Yeah.
It strikes me, I mean, both of you guys, Emily with your 200-miler and how alone you were with that, and then Vicky with doing a 50-miler with, a dozen people starting it. Like, both of you guys did this, really long effort, essentially solo. So I'm curious if either of you guys want to just kind of talk about like how you kind of mentally get yourself in a place that you can get through those low places. Like, I know I'm personally someone who loves to run with people. And so like, for me, as long as I'm running with someone, I'm happy and I'm talking, and that gets me through the low places. But neither of you guys could have that in those moments. So how did you kind of work through that? Vicky, do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. I do like running with people. I don't want to be like I'm super antisocial, because I train, I'm part of a running group, in my local area, and I don't run all my long runs with them, but I do run some, just to get some community out there. But I really I like being by myself on the trails. I like just knowing that I can do my own thing and run my own race, and it's not dependent on anybody else. That if I'm running with somebody else, I get worried that either I'm holding them back or they're pushing my pace, or like just something isn't going to align. And so I kind of I think maybe it's a little bit of a control thing. I like to know that I can control my pace and when I eat and when I walk, and like all the things that I want to be able to do in a race. So and I always hate, when I was running marathons, I always hated the big spectator sections, because I was like, I'm struggling and I look grumpy and everybody's going to see that. So I love just being in the woods and knowing I can look or be or do whatever I want, and there's nobody around to witness.
Okay.
Yeah, me, I do most of my, well, basically every run by myself, so I get used to it. I think Moab, you have to really rely on yourself to like pull you out of those moments, right? Because you're on the side of a mountain, like there's no one coming to help you out. There was a lot of, when I got to those low points, it was like I told myself to appreciate like what I was doing and that I was able to do that in that moment, and really just look around, right? Like it's incredible. So that pulled me through. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was times where I wish I had somebody to talk to, but kind of like Vicky, I like the time by myself, and I spend so much of my day at work just talking to people, right? As I was so excited to go spend 4 days by myself, and I had my phone for like the GPS and stuff, but it was in airplane mode. And I was like, there was nobody texting me, nobody, I don't have to answer to anyone. So for me, it's kind of that time to get away and, spend some quality time with myself. So,
So do
I
you
will-
use
oh.
pacers at all, Emily?
what was
Do you
that?
use pacers at all when you run, when you race? So that's your choice. You like to have the support, but not have people with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think crew, I had friends that they like crewing, right? Because for them, it's a little vacation too. I think they're a little crazy for coming to find me at 2 a.m., but hey, to each their own. And at Vermont, I've had,
Says the girl that runs 200 miles. Okay,
Yeah, right?
go on,
Yeah.
Emily, go on.
Yeah.
Yep, they're crazy.
yeah, they're crazy. What are they doing? Vermont, I've had pacers, but I think that's more for, I have friends that like want to come help. And so I'm like, yeah, sure. But Moab, I really wanted to prove it to myself that I could do it. And I also had this like, I struggled with asking people to come the whole way across the country, not knowing, like, I'd never done it before, right? So I'm like, that little bit inside of you that says, well, what if I don't make it and I waste their time, right? So I don't know. I just wanted to do it myself.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll get on my soapbox for just 1 second about that. It's just, I feel like ultra runners, so many people like feel guilty asking someone else to come and support them. And like, I guess I always think about like, what do I think when someone asks me to support them? Like, I don't care if they finish first, last, or don't finish at all. Like, it's a way for me to participate in an event without having to actually run an event. And it's awesome. And I get to support a friend or support maybe just a random stranger. I so often hear exactly what you're saying, Emily. And anytime I'm like on a training run with someone or, talking to someone about it, I'm always like, just ask. People want to be involved. People want to help you. Your friends want to support you. And this is a way they can do it. And they don't really care. To them, you're crazy, regardless of whether you only make it 100 miles of your 200 miler or whether you made it the whole way or whether you're first, last, or anywhere in between. They just want to be out there supporting you. So sorry, I'll get off my soapbox, but
Well,
So
and
next time I'll ask you, Amy.
I've done it. I love doing it.
and it is so important. I think like I was gonna say, when you were talking, Emily, I was thinking about like crew and seeing your crew and on the 50 miler and then on the 50K, I did this last weekend. It was a loop course and I saw my partner, at the end of every loop. And there was like this 50K was 5 loops. And at the end of the 3rd loop, I was so in my head and like, I'm so slow. It's terrible. It's, I'm at 19 miles and there's still so far to go. And I already feel tired and this sucks and it's awful. And like, he just, here's your bottles, get out there, do it. And my next loop was the best loop I had. So like there's those people just, they can offer so much in the moment. And then in the 50 miler, I would actively think at the end of each loop, like, okay, 2 miles till I see Chris, 1 mile till I see Chris. Like I was counting down until I could see him again and then like get that boost and go off there again. So just having those people is, it's so important.
I find sometimes even with crew, like even if I feel horrible, sometimes I fake it because I don't want them to see how horrible I feel. But at the end of the day, that faking it, like I'm sometimes fooling myself as well. Like I'm trying to, kind of hold my stuff together and it actually helps me hold my stuff together a little better. And so sometimes it also like, it has that benefit also where it's like, oh, right. Can't look weak in front of this person.
It's the remember to smile, like smiling makes you feel better. So
Yes.
yeah. So, but in like, I mean, I'm like looking at these 2 races, like a looped race in some ways is great because you can break down the race into loops, but it also feels a little easier to be like, okay, that was enough, and then leave. And a race that's just one giant loop, like what happens if you're like at mile 128 and you're like, I'm done? Pick me up, like, well, what would happen? Because I assume that did happen in Moab, right? Not everyone finished, or did they? I mean,
No,
yeah.
almost half didn't.
Okay. So how does that work then? you know, like, how did they end up getting tracked? Or do you like contact the race and be like, I stopped? Or
There you had to stop at you had to stop at an aid station because there was nothing in between them, right? So, I don't know, or their crew took them back. I kept telling myself there was no way back, except for I had to get there myself. And I remember hitting the point in the map where you start to finally turn back and you still have 120 miles. And I'm like, yes, I'm heading back to Moab, only 120 miles to go. But I was heading back in the right direction. So
Right.
it mentally made it easier.
yeah. So what's next for you, Emily? Do you know?
Vermont,
Yeah.
this year. Yeah. I've got ideas for the next 2 years, but Amy doesn't know them yet. So I'm not going to say
Yes. We won't make this a big
We've talked a
deal.
little bit about it, but yeah.
Yeah.
Earlier this year, Emily and I had a big conversation about goals for this year, and it was more, let's talk about like, it's so interesting that we often just talk about goals on kind of a 1 year cycle. And yet, given everything that was going on in Emily's life, it was more important to be like, let's talk a 2 year cycle. What can we do this year that's going to set you up for these big goals that you have that might be a year off? So let's kind of talk 2 years. So yeah.
Yep.
Unless there's more that I don't know about, but we can talk offline about that. But Vermont 100 this summer is
Yep.
Emily's next big thing, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, all right. So Vicky, how about for you? You just came off of a race this past weekend of 50K. How was that?
It
How'd
was,
that
it went really well. It was good. It was sort of my, like, let's have something on the calendar to train for over the winter because it's dark and cold and I don't want to go outside otherwise. So that was really useful. It was a good confidence builder. Like I said, I had a really low spot in the middle, and then to kind of come out of that and have two really good laps and finish strong, that was definitely a confidence builder. So I'm feeling happy going into the rest of the year. And then I'm going to do the same 50 miler again in September. I really loved the race. It was fantastic. And I kind of left and like an hour after finishing, I was like, oh, I could do this better, or I could do that better, or like, and knowing the course and what I'm getting into, I want to try it again and see if I can improve and optimize some of the things that like I wish I'd known the first time. And then we'll see from there. Like 50 miles has been a nice target for me, and it's fit well with the rest of my life in the training, but who knows? We'll see from there.
Yeah. So what do your friends think when they hear, yeah, I'm doing a 50 miler? What kind of reactions do you get?
My friends know me so far, and a lot of them are from my run group, so that's fine. But I started a new job about 6 months before starting with Amy, and so like a lot of my new work colleagues were hearing about this for the first time last September when I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go run a 50 miler, and got a lot of weird looks, a lot of like, why? And like, are you okay?
Do you get oh, you mean all at once?
Yes, yes.
I don't even want to drive 50
Absolutely,
miles, let
yeah.
alone run. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, I don't want to drive that far. And they're like, do you stop in between, like, all in one day? Yep. But a lot of people who are just really sweet and supportive too, and we're like, wow, that's that's fantastic. I'm super proud of you. So yeah, it runs the gamut.
Yeah. So has telling that story to anyone inspire them to do something different? Have you ever seen that, where you tell your story and maybe it's not go run, but maybe it's, oh, I've been thinking about doing this, and you hearing your story gets them to think about what they want to do?
Yeah, definitely. I know folks who are runners, and like a woman that I work with, she's doing her first half marathon. She's been running 5Ks and 10Ks, but she's doing her first half marathon in May. And she was like, you know, I can't take credit for that inspiration, but you know, she and I talked a lot about the race, and she's been excited to run longer. I think more so when we hiked the AT, like we got a lot of people saying, I went out and hiked because, you know, I was reading your blog, and it just got me inspired and excited. So I think it definitely helps.
Yeah. And Emily, I'm sure that you've convinced a lot of people to do 200-mile races, right?
Oh yeah, all of them.
All of them, right?
All of my friends. Yeah, no. I get all the same things that, you know, Vicky was just saying, like, do you sleep? You know, all of that. But yeah, I haven't, you know, found anyone else in my close friends that are interested. So they're
I
like,
mean, think about this, 50,000 plus people run the New York City Marathon every year. And Moab, how many people did that?
2 something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought it was like maybe 250 or something that started, or something like that.
I think originally 240 was the list, because I don't know if they did it because of 240, but not everyone started, but yeah, roughly around 200.
Yeah. And so is there any like sort of common theme that you see of the participants when they sign up, like age or they're all vegans, or like, is there anything that like that you see that runs, or is just ultra running just about being individual and pursuing your own desires?
Are you talking like ultra running in general with that question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
I'll say, as a race director, I think that's one of the amazing things about ultra running is like you get all ages. Like I direct the Vermont 100, and we have had, you know, 18-year-olds run it, and we've had like our oldest finisher is a 75-year-old who's run the 100-mile race there. And you see all body types, and you see you know, just like it's everyone. And I think even like the first several times I ran Vermont 100, I after a couple of years when I kind of knew what I was doing, I started having running friends of mine who were like road runners, and maybe they'd run up to a marathon. I started having them crew and pace me, and it was so fascinating because it would take them crewing and pacing me once for them to be at an ultra and see the wide range of body types, the wide range of ages, the wide range of paces. And they were like, oh, you mean I don't have to train as hard as Amy does to be able to do this? I don't have to, you know, be fast like Amy. I don't have to look. I don't have to anything. Like everyone can do this as long as they're healthy and like their body's physically able. But there's so many people can finish these things as long as they can put one foot in front of the other. But sometimes you literally have to see somebody that's a 75-year-old guy, you know, finishing Vermont 100 in under 29 hours to be like, oh, right. Like I can't use the fact that I'm 55 as an excuse that I can't finish it. Or you know, you watch Nipmuc Dave, who's this guy who he was in his 60s at the time when he had his last finish, but he had arm crutches because he had no cartilage in his knees. And so he's a mobility impaired athlete, and he finished the Vermont 100 in under 29 hours. Like and everyone can do, sorry, I get so excited about it, but it's like really everyone can do it. And there is no common theme other than, you know, just being like stubborn and passionate and maybe willing to go through a little bit of pain, but our age and our, you know, our size and our genetics, like there's a lot of things that people think in their heads are excuses or reasons why they can't do it. And you really can. You just have to find the right race or, you know, find whatever makes you really excited.
Yeah. So I mean, do you have any experiences with either Emily or Vicky where they have said to you leading up to it, I'm not sure I can?
Oh boy. I feel like Emily does not, because she just is like, whatever, we're gonna win it. We're gonna win, you know? Like Vicky said, like say leading up to the 50 miler, or even like when she was coming back from her hysterectomy and we had the 50 miler, and you know, we in it as an intermediary, there was I think it was the Eliza LaPierre fan club 50K that was kind of a buildup. I remember at times Vicky was a little just kind of anxious of, am I there already? Because a month or two ago, I was, maybe, the training volume didn't look that much, or, it was 50% walking, 50% running. And, we were really kind of tapering her back in easy. And yeah, so there were some of those conversations that we had. And at the end of the day, I mean, Vicky proved me right that like she was much more capable than she was giving herself credit for in some of those times, because, she was strong, and we, thought about it before she took some time off. And there's a lot of that fitness that she was going to carry through, even with a little bit of block off. And so sometimes you have to look at we had to like remember to look at the much bigger picture, and not just maybe the last month per se, but kind of think about everything that we had done in 6 months leading up to that, to really kind of know that she could do it. And then
I
once
didn't
she
know
did
I
it,
was
it built
gonna.
that confidence, and then we knew the 50 miler,
I didn't know I was gonna make the cutoffs until I made them. So you had a lot more confidence than I did.
But the reality is though, and this is so typical, I do this to myself too, is like from the outside looking in, I can look at the numbers and look at it a lot more holistically. And I don't know, I think I'm harder on myself than anyone else would be if they were just looking at the numbers. I like, even just this past weekend, I'm doing a 100 miler in another month. And so I was doing a tune-up run of a 50 miler, and I was starting at 6 a.m, and I literally packed a headlamp because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to finish before it gets dark. And of course I finished hours before it got dark, but in my head, I didn't know, and I didn't have that confidence. And I just was like, I have to plan for everything, because not having a headlamp isn't going to be an excuse. But it was ridiculous. Like I was hours ahead of that, but I didn't have that confidence. But somebody else, if they were looking at my numbers from the outside, would have just been like, Amy, you don't need a headlamp. What are you thinking? Like, you're going to be fine. Like sometimes we're our own worst enemies, and it's really helpful to have someone from the outside that can look at it and be a lot more realistic about what's going on and where we are.
Yeah, realistic, but also be a cheerleader,
Yes.
She's got your back.
Yes.
Yeah. And then when you showed up in Boston this week, then, that was nothing, right? Just 26 miles knocked off. One
Yep.
day.
Yeah, Boston was fun. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming here and sharing your stories. And every time I'm like, oh, maybe that's next for me one of these days. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And just with how much you were willing to talk about your experiences, and so excited to see what comes next for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.